But how typical was your television family? Not that there is a typical American family. I'm not sure what that really means. But how typical was your television family, do you think? What did it represent, Harriet?
I think it represented middle America. Ozzie came from a family in New Jersey. His dad was a banker. And he came from that kind of a home. You know, he went to a public school, and then he went to Rutgers University. And it was... Mine was a little different. I came from that kind of a family, but my mother and dad were in show business, so I was born in the theater.
And you started early. How old were you when you first went in front of people for money?
6 weeks, do you believe it?
Ozzie spent early 1932 playing in Miami Beach, Florida. He filled out every section of the band, including hiring Harriet Hilliard as singer. She was born Peggy Lou Snyder on July 18, 1909 in Des Moines, Iowa. Her parents, Roy and Hazel, were noted performers who helped guide the stage careers of famous actors, including Clark Gable and Ralph Bellamy. Harriet was on stage from almost birth. By 15, she came to New York with her mother to study ballet, and starred on Broadway the following year in The Blonde Sinner. Soon after, she was playing two-a-days at RKO's vaudeville theaters throughout the country. When she was booked at the Hollywood restaurant in New York, it was originally supposed to be for a limited engagement. Before long, she was earning $150 per week, or roughly $3 grand today, right in the heart of the Great Depression.
I also recall in those days you had a vocalist named Harriet Hilliard,
yes, right,
with whom you sang boy-girl duets. Now,
yes,
whatever happened to her?
Yes. Well, she became Harriet Nelson, and
yes.
Right, you bet. Well, the reason I did that, I started to have a vocalist with the band, was because Rudy Valley, if you recall, was a tremendous name in those days. It's hard for people nowadays to realize what a tremendous name Rudy was. The girls loved him and the guys hated him.
That's right.
I didn't like that idea very much, and I thought maybe rather than to sing the songs to the girls that the guys brought to the dance, if I could have an attractive girl on the bandstand and sing songs to her, musical comedy fashion, might work out, and so...
it worked out.
It worked out, yes.
In the fall of 1932, the band played the Paramount Grill on 46th Street in Broadway. They were on from 8:30 to 1 a.m., not only for the dancing crowds, but playing 2 radio broadcasts each night, developing a conversational style that became a musical comedy routine. By the middle of the year, Ozzie and Harriet were dating.
The Baker's Broadcast, brought to you by the makers of Rice and Keats in behalf of the 30,000 bakers of the United States and Canada, presenting Ozzie Nelson and his orchestra, with Harriet Hilliard, and starring Joe Penner.
In the fall of 1933, they signed to do their first weekly radio series, The Baker's Broadcast, which was sponsored by Standard Brands and produced by the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ozzie Nelson speaking.
Joe Penner was the star for the next 2 seasons, and the audience peaked in 1935 with a rating of 31.3, 6th highest on radio. Penner was replaced in the fall of 1935, and Robert Ripley took over.
Believe it or not. The Baker's Broadcast, presented in behalf of the 30,000 bakers in the United States and Canada, with Ozzie Nelson and his orchestra, and, believe it or not, Robert Ripley.
Thanks to their success, Ozzie and Harriet were exempt from the worst hardships of the Great Depression, and New York in the 1930s was the place to be for a band leader. The city featured Paul Whiteman, Eddie Duchin, Guy Lombardo, Tommy Dorsey, Ray Noble, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Vincent Lopez, and Ozzie Nelson and Harriet Hilliard. By virtue of playing together every night, the Nelson Orchestra had developed a distinctive relaxed style, and working for the Baker's Broadcast helped Ozzie meet the show's producer and director, Ed Gardner. The combination created a zany broadcast, and that was fine with announcer Ben Grauer, who was never a fan of NBC's stuffy 1930s atmosphere.
This is
Ozzie Nelson, we're greeting you with a medley of Top Hat and No Strings.
All staff people had to wear tuxedo after 6 p.m. The dominant note was one of cautious formality with the listener. The doctrine was that you were a guest in the home. It was, you can understand it if they came out of the, of a kind of a rigid doctrine of decorum and courtesy and correctness. This was the thing to do, and this was even reflected in the broadcaster's work. The earliest hosts or masters of ceremonies were very square. They had to be. The idea was that you were the spokesman for this dignified, responsible, highly ethical corporation. They weren't sure of themselves and in the new medium to take chances or to fool around or to loosen up. It was ceremonial rather than creative.
Ozzie Nelson later claimed in his autobiography that he watched numerous men fall in love with Harriet Hilliard whenever she was on stage. He had quickly become one of them. Early on the morning of August 18, 1935, the band was traveling by car in Texas. They were on their way to the Coconut Grove Club in California. Ozzie and Harriet rode alone with their driver, Harold Lane. Harriet suddenly turned to Ozzie and said, "You haven't said anything the past 50 miles. Ozzie had been thinking about their future. He felt the couple had enough money saved up to get married. He asked Harriet what she thought. Her response, "I thought you'd never ask."